Hey everybody, Jason Burmis here, and we are back on YouTube. Who knew? After the third time of being taken off, we challenged the last spam and deceptive practices that came on a walk and talk, and oddly enough, they sort of kind of maybe ruled in my favor. They took the strike away, and then they said it was still medical misinformation, so they removed the video despite it being a walk and talk from May of last year. You know how it's going. We could be off tomorrow. That's why I'm encouraging you to make the free Rokfin account. We're doing everything free over there. All the premium stuff is basically throwbacks or other people's stuff that I repost, etc., that I'm a guest on. The gentleman that's joining us also on the platform, by the way, we have Robbie Martin, one half of Media Roots. So much to go over. We haven't had Robbie on in, maybe even 6 months. It's been a long time. A lot has developed since then. Recently, he's talked to Whitney Webb about the weaponization of space. Obviously, that is a topic near and dear to my heart. There has been a lot of turmoil and military conflict back and forth in Israel as of late. That aligned with the fact that his sister just won a huge lawsuit. You've been making waves in that respect. And then kind of on the follow-up, all of a sudden, Netanyahu, that has been able to seize and hold on to power for some time now in a just, I don't know what to call it, in a very rapid fashion, is now being taken out as at least the face of the leadership in Israel. So much to go over, Mr. Martin. MediaRoots.com is where you can find him, or you can also follow him over on the Twitter at Fluorescent Gray. He's got sassy takes all over. He's currently Joseph Gordon-Levitt, if you didn't know. So, Robbie, how are you, brother? And how you doing? We haven't talked in a while.
I'm good, man. How are you?
Very well. You know, this whole Iowa thing has been really working out for me. I'm about to take a trip across the country again, go back to New York for a little while, and then my little sister is getting married in Virginia the following weekend in, I think, 13 days, so a little less than 2 weeks. So going to do some family time. Yeah. Going to do some family time. I'm going to meet my nephew, her new son for the very first time, and my niece that was born just before I left New York from my brother. So really looking forward to all of it, brother.
That's awesome, man. I just wanted to let people know that the actual website URL is MediaRoots.org.
Oh, my bad.
No, it's all right. But we don't do much on the website itself. It's mostly the podcast now. So like probably the best place to get our stuff is just like, and I hate name dropping like Apple products, but like iTunes and Stitcher and basically any podcast platform. If you type in Media Roots Radio, you'll find it.
Well, the bottom line is you have to utilize those platforms just like I'm utilizing YouTube to try to bring people over to where I am uncensored, right? It's kind of the conundrum we're in. And to me, it's just an extension of this idea that we are using technology to empower ourselves and not enslave ourselves, as just because we are using said platforms, that doesn't mean we don't get to speak out against the greater social consequences of said platforms, etc. So where to begin, Robbie? I really do want to get into your QAnon podcast with the gentleman who did the documentary series over at HBO. I watched both that and the Vice series, listens to your podcast. I think there's some interesting things to go over. But let's stick right now specifically to this timeline in Israel where you have all this back and forth with Palestine, the rockets, the outward military conflicts, horrific things showing up in social media, marches around the country, a backlash for your sister's appearance on the Tim Dillon show. So much going on. A lot, right? And then all of a sudden we get, and her court case, which again, free speech is free speech, guys. Whether you like it or not, I hate to tell you, but free speech is free speech, and I'm so happy that court decision went the way it did. It's extremely important. So all these things, and then all of a sudden, the face of Israel is being ousted. What's your take, brother?
Well, first of all, my take is surprise, because I think even people who've been really following the political turmoil internally in Israel thought this was sort of a long shot, that Netanyahu would be gone, and it happened. I think to many people's surprise. I think Miko Palid, I think that's how you pronounce his last name, was just on Abby's podcast. She has an Empire Files podcast. She isn't putting out as much video content. He kind of acted like it wasn't going to happen. He said it was a very unlikely situation. Now that it's happened, I guess we just have to start really studying, Naftali Bennett and to see what his actual track record is. And what's interesting, Jason, is they're presenting Naftali Bennett as if he's some kind of moderate version of Netanyahu. While it is true that the new right party that he represents, Naftali Bennett, and the rest of these moderate parties in the Israeli parliament did sort of form this coalition to defeat Netanyahu. Now, it's almost like, and if you don't really follow Israeli politics, you probably think, well, Netanyahu's got to be the most extreme one, right? Like, this guy can't be as extreme. But I almost see it like, it's almost as if, Jason, the Democrats here joined up with the rhinos in the GOP to lift up Tom Cotton to beat Trump. That's like almost the equivalent of, like, in terms of their comparing their extremeness. So, like, Naftali Bennett is basically just as extreme as Netanyahu. In fact, I mean, he's said some horrific things over the years. He said he's killed a lot of Arabs in his life, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, imagine someone saying that about Jews. He said things like any Palestinian terrorist, doesn't even deserve a jail cell. They just deserve execution. What does that even mean, Palestinian terrorist? Israel seems to define any Palestinian, even one that might pick up a rock, as a terrorist. So
and you know what? Again, we defined terrorist or enemy combatant or any of that as basically, I believe it got down to the level of 14-year-old male in the Middle East.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Wasn't it? It was. I'm pretty sure. Like, I just want people to understand where these policies come from. Our own policy of quote unquote terrorists in the war on terror overseas was 14-year-old male. Take a good look at your son next time he's on JV varsity, hitting that baseball, shooting. That's the terrorist, guys. So to say, and not only that, WikiLeaks at the time when these conflicts were really heating up, were reiterating the fact and showing these documents where it was policy for the IDF to push and shove Palestinians for no other reason, for them to be Palestinians and to also, physically intimidate them. So this is official policy. These are things people have to realize. I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, I mean, it's so crazy, Jason, because even just out of this recent conflict, and there's a ceasefire now, it doesn't mean it's over, obviously, but it's so over the top that, like, you'll even see IDF soldiers basically physically assaulting international journalists on camera. There was one instance where an Israeli soldier tried to throw a smoke grenade at an ambulance that was basically about to, like, put someone in the ambulance. And a journalist was filming, sort of doing a stand-up interview right in front of him. And she's like, look, this guy's about to throw a grenade, like, right at the ambulance. And the soldier, like, kind of does like a fake out, like he wasn't really going to throw it. It's like, even with cameras on them, they still do horrendous things. I mean, there's a video from, I don't know if your audience is familiar with Rachel Corrie, but, the Israeli government basically crushed an American protester with a bulldozer for trying to protest a settlement, or not a settlement, but a Palestinian's home from being bulldozed. Yeah. The Israeli government doesn't give a shit, Jason. And, the incident I was just about to mention that's on camera is IDF actually shoots a tank shell directly at a cameraman who was, I don't know what outlet he was filming for. I don't even think it was. I think it was for an Egyptian outlet. So, in terms of, like, what outlets they think are terroristic, this one's kind of lower down on the list, and yet they still just shoot a tank shell straight at the cameraman as he's filming, instantly killing him. I can't really think of any other country that's able to get away with this kind of stuff besides, of course, the U.S. government. So it's pretty amazing, the brazenness that they're still doing. And this optical change of having Netanyahu leave and being replaced by Naftali Bennett is just that. I think it's optics. Yet, the moderates in Israel are sort of playing along with this and acting as if it's some radical change.
So do you think there's also the possibility that whatever fallout there is, not only from this current, military conflict, but also the possible fallout of the lockdowns the last 18 months, the implementation of the Green Pass, and, the Boop Boop program that went through. If there are, obviously, actually Israel, more than any other country, is now admitting to the myocarditis and things like that, and those studies in younger people. But then you also had the use of the Green Pass to kind of segregate a population within Israel, right? Ironically, from IBM, the same good folks that brought us, the tabulation machines during the Holocaust. The irony is just over the top. So, to bring in a new regime and to put a new brand and a face on it that we won't use it in the same way, but still legitimize it. And then again, anything negative that comes out over the last couple of years, medical-wise or possibly policy-wise with these things, they can just blame on the last regime.
Exactly. And I think, Jason, that's exactly what's going to happen kind of across the board. So, for example, Naftali Bennett made a promise not to build any more settlements in Israel, right? Based on what he said in his track record, that just seems to run completely counter to his belief. So that seems like something that's going to, a promise that's going to be knocked down immediately. So they're acting as if these more extreme policies Netanyahu did, like Netanyahu was very encouraging of the settlements, which is one of the things that the U.S. government actually would, slightly push back on over the last several years. And they'll probably just blame that on him. They'll probably blame the most extreme behavior of the IDF on Netanyahu. And, if you go back to right after 9/11, Ehud Barak was considered this way more moderate liberal version of the Israeli prime minister that, Netanyahu was. But yet look at what Israel was up to right after 9/11. I mean, they really amped things up against, the Palestinians. They were meddling in the Palestinian elections. They actually were encouraging Hamas. They basically wanted to make it optically appear that all Palestinians were terrorists by being members of Hamas as an excuse to do whatever they wanted to them, to kill them more. So it's really actually weird when you look back at the Israeli prime ministers that have been in there and how they were considered moderate and liberal compared to Netanyahu and all the horrible things they did. So that's just one illustration of how, that what's considered more moderate in Israel to us just seems like the same very far right, neo-fascism that Netanyahu was up to.
Well, again, I'm going to keep my eyes on all of this because, again, in the last speech Netanyahu just gave, he said that, Biden, as if Biden runs anything, was being soft on Iran. We have seen a lot less pushback, not only in this Biden administration, but really in the last decade plus against any kind of military action by the media in the Middle East, whether it be Iran or otherwise. There hasn't been much pushback. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know if you saw the cover of Time magazine this week. Have you seen it?
It was about China. No, I didn't.
No, it's better, Robbie. We're going to do it live. I haven't done a bit on this yet, and Robbie Martin might be the perfect person to put this one up with. When I saw, this is how much I've talked about a long time that we live in a cartoon, and this is like cartoon level shit. But when I saw this, so this is Time magazine, okay, and it's Biden takes on Putin. Okay, and it's like this painted up aviator, and he's got the Putin thing going on. And when I saw this, I was just like, try and tell me that this cover is news and not a straight up bad idea for a Hollywood sequel like Die Hard Forever. This time, Joey B poops on Putin instead of himself. Coming this summer, shit's never been sprayed like this before. Hashtag the new Red Scare isn't in Joe's underwear. You look at this thing. And the idea that, he's some kind of Bruce Willis mixed with Harrison Ford movie character that's going to take down the evil Soviet villain. And the other idea that they're pushing every single one of these cyber attacks as, Russian agents just shows you how far away from the narrative, the mainstream media is when it comes to foreign policy, Robbie.
Yeah, it's so funny to me that Trump was portrayed as someone who was being completely controlled by Putin, and yet the media did their best to ignore every single escalation he made against Russia, including the one thing that Obama wasn't willing to do, which was to send the $300 million of weapons supplemental to the Ukrainian army. It didn't matter what Trump did. Trump could have dropped a bomb, like Trump could have attacked Russia and they would have still been saying that about him. So
well,
you did
have that incident in the Middle East. I think it was sometime in 2017 where Russian and United States troops absolutely killed each other, I believe, in Afghanistan. Well, that was a big deal for like a day. Like 100 of them, 100 Russian soldiers were killed there. And
I think that was during the tail end of Obama, wasn't it?
I'm pretty sure. Syria? No, I'm pretty sure it was after. It was before. All right, so it was after Obama had announced basically they didn't want Russia's help with ISIS, but they were like, "Fuck this, we're going in anyway." Right? We're gonna go clear it out. And then it was in the very beginning of the Trump administration. Something dirty went down, and I think 100 Russians were actually killed, and they downplayed it. Well, you know what? I'm gonna on your next rant, whenever we talk, I'm gonna look that up because you're right. Like outwardly, they were trying to prove this case really in court and the court of public opinion that Russia had not only meddled in the election, but all these people, not only Trump, right, not only his administration, but anybody that would question the narrative were somehow Russian bots on Twitter or on social media. And it's now a new narrative where these spies that we never caught and we never proved did anything are now hacking our infrastructure. So kind of speak to that.
Well, it's really fascinating, Jason. I mean, I was just going back into rebuilding America's defenses, the classic, it's become sort of an iconic, infamous thing in the, 9/11 truth folklore. But what's so fascinating about the document when you read it now is it spends a lot of time talking about a primary goal in this paper. So, at first it's like, we need a new Pearl Harbor. We need to catalyze an event to get all this kickstarted. Now, one of the final stages in what they wanted to do was control of physical space, outer space, militarization of space, and cyberspace simultaneously as one of their last basically stages of this rollout. So what's really kind of disturbing to me, it's like, the stuff with Russia is really scary when it comes to could this escalate into a hot war? I mean, Biden, sort of taking this posture again makes that scary again. Yet I'm sort of going in the direction now, what if all this Russia stuff was just set up to just lock down the internet?
Well, that's
how did this all really start? It's like this new Cold War, what's it really accomplished from our side? Just basically censoring our entire internet and making it seem as if we had to do it because the pesky Russians were threatening us and the troll farms. And it's like, let's get serious. Can you imagine how many U.S. corporate troll farms and U.S. government and even just U.S. military intel, 20-year-old kids doing this shit.
Let's talk about that because that's so important. By the way, it is the Battle of Kasham. It actually did happen in February of 2018 under Trump.
Yeah,
and
wow.
And it was between Russian mercenaries and U.S. commandos in Syria. Oh yeah,
See,
man.
I didn't even remember that, man. That's crazy.
I totally remember it because it was nuts how many people actually died and how much came out about it. But this is something that if it's not on your radar, I'm waiting for the Media Roots podcast on this, bro. So about 3 weeks ago, now almost a month, this is a Newsweek article that takes about 30 minutes to read. But let me just read you the opening paragraph of what you just discussed, all these privatized organizations, bots, all these proxy networks. So this is the opening paragraph of this thing, okay? How unconstitutional and crazy is this? The largest undercover force the world has ever known is the one created by the Pentagon over the past decade. Some 60,000 people now belong to this secret army, many working under masked identities and in low profile, all part of a broad program called signature reduction. The force, more than 10 times the size of the clandestine elements of the CIA, carries out domestic and foreign assignments, both in military uniforms and in undercover civilian cover, in real life and online, sometimes hiding in private businesses and consultancies, some of them household name companies. Now, in this, they also talk about how they have access to the infrastructure of these databases. They redo them. They create profiles of non-people for 5+ years on social media to create these networks. It gets better, Robbie. So I want to just show you one of the devices of signature reduction. So again, very extensive. What you think you're looking at is a hand. That, in fact, is not a hand. That, sir, is a glove that fits tightly over your hand that has whatever biometric fingerprint they want to put on it and emits human oils as it does it.
Oh man, are they trying to just make us paranoid right now? Like, seriously.
Well, think about this. You know how I got this article. It's funny because I just did 2 episodes of Conspiracy Social Club with Callan and Tripoli, and finally got 9/11 at least in his. Like, you should watch it. It's amazing. But I showed him this. And then I'm actually going to meet him in Albany when I go back to New York next week. And I sent him this article, and he's like, holy shit. And I'm like, yeah, no shit. Annie Jacobson made the great point that, all this hubbub about January 6th, and by the way, almost 300 watching, not even 100 thumbs up. Guys, let's rock that YouTube algorithm.
Thumbs up, man.
Yeah, let's bend it over and take it from behind. You know what I'm saying, guys? We really need to thrust into the rock fin. So she goes, it's really odd that this person who dropped these pipe bombs on January 6th was able to fucking beat all the biometrics and all the CCTV in D.C., right? But who knows? Maybe if you're a part of signature reduction, they talk about magnetic plates that just go over your regular plates and tags that don't even lead to the person that they pull over if they pull over that person, and how that person's identity is like wrapped in 2 other identities. It's fucking wild sauce. Not one congressional hearing. This is I believe it was almost 2-year investigation by Newsweek with all these FOIAs, and I obviously want access to the raw data. I think we should all get access to the raw data when they're showing us, basically these gloves that look human-like that give off biometric fingerprints and human oils. They show some of the masking technology in this. It's extensive, brother. I really encourage you to go check it out because it's the admission of really what we've talked about for some time, this infrastructure that was built and legitimized post 9/11 through the DHS and these subcontractors and organizations, and the more and more clandestine pseudo companies and think tanks, man. And these things are everywhere, and that's why you especially have highlighted good old rebuilding America's defense. Why don't you tell people about rebuilding America's defense?
Sure, and I hope we get a chance to talk about QAnon because
this
stuff you're telling me is making me think about that right now and how easy it would have been for some of these 60,000 people to, hype that up. But Rebuilding America's Defense is a paper from, I want to say 1999 or 2000. I don't know the exact year. But essentially, it's a lot of the most heavy hitters from the Bush administration, the neocons that we've heard of, and some ones that we associate with just punditry, which is interesting because this document, Rebuilding America's Defenses, is credited as being sort of the blueprints for the Iraq War. So to have Bill Kristol, Robert Kagan's father, Donald Kagan, Robert Kagan's brother, Fred Kagan, these people are not in government, but yet they were involved in writing these blueprints for not just the Iraq War, but the war on terror. People like Paul Wolfowitz, Scooter Libby, trying to remember other people. Jeb Bush is involved in Project for the New American Century, but he didn't help write this document. But it's got all these infamous neocons fingerprints on it. But what's fascinating, Jason, is let's just isolate it to the 9/11 truther community, even for people out there who aren't truthers. This was a document that was mostly looked at as being, wow, they had let the cat out of the bag before 9/11 and said, we want a new Pearl Harbor. Mm-hmm. That was what caught people's attention. Really crazy stuff. Then the race-specific bioweapon suggestion from the document became something that people talked about. Understandably, it's a crazy suggestion. I think what got really missed, though, this last 3 or 4 years is the last stage of their plans in Rebuilding America's Defenses is control of space, militarization of space, and cyberspace. They see that as one of the most important goals to not just maintain American hegemony, but to essentially, push the U.S. empire into an even more powerful position moving forward. And also, Jason, I can't not mention this. If you do a keyword search on Rebuilding America's Defenses, this infamous truther document, the number one adversarial country that is mentioned in this document is China. It's not Russia. It's not Iran. It's not Afghanistan. It's not Iraq. Those are all mentioned too. China appears about I don't know, 1.5 times more than any other country mentioned. So, it's kind of interesting how all these things now, controlling of cyberspace, militarization of space under Trump, and then China hysteria is all happening at once. And it's like, wow, did the neocons predict this? Like, how is that too happening, kind of like as one of these things they sort of foresaw? So it's quite creepy for me to go back to that document now. And I think it's also really interesting how this locking down of cyberspace, whatever you want to call it, happened in the private sector. During Trump, it was done as a sort of response to fighting disinformation. We got to stop fake news. We got to stop QAnon, et cetera, all in the private sector. But then simultaneously, you have, sort of the Trump movement, or at least Trump's administration, launching Space Force. Mm-hmm. And we see these things as being two diametrically opposed forces: the private sector, the Silicon Valley, the libs, versus sort of Trump and his administration. Yet these two goals of PNAC were kind of being done at the same time by these supposedly diametrically opposed forces. So I find that kind of interesting that it's sort of all coming together at once, when we perceive it as sort of like, oh, it's the deep state fighting against, the patriots or whatever, when obviously there's something more happening here that I think we need to sort of penetrate like 1 or 2 layers deeper, into this.
Well, I agree. Well, I don't think it's any of that. I think they've now set up China. Like, listen, man, from the very beginning when we talked about this, I called bioweapon, and I said, not a leak, seeded. But what's the narrative? China, U.S., China, U.S., China, U.S. And it's always red, right? Now, as far as weaponizing space, this is June 1st. Rocket delivery of cargo anywhere in an hour in new Air Force budget proposal via what? SpaceX and Tesla. And basically them promoting this Elon Musk bullshit. At the same time, they put up Starlink. What do? They put up their own Starlink, Blackjack. DARPA does it with him. Now, Neuralink, brain chip, this is Musk, will end language in 5 to 10 years. There is a document, my friend, and you want to talk about these organizations, called Future Warfare, Future Strategic Issues, Future Warfare 2025. Have you seen this document yet?
I have not, but I remember you telling me about this. Yeah.
Yes. So one of the big
2025.
It's perfect. Watch. Look. I mean, if you look at this, let's just go down some of the bullet points. So first of all, this is, although it says NASA, Bushnell then, before then, and now is still the chief scientist at NASA. I have him on video in 2011 talking about population control, Malthus 101, talking about then how they'd already put 10,000 brain chips in people. Let me repeat that, 10,000 over a decade ago. And he talks about some other stunning things like, I don't know, genomically changing the human race so they can survive on the planet. And I mean, people laugh at him. But you look at this. This is from 2001. He was touring with this in July, of 2001. And over the years, there's a couple different versions of these you can see. This is a PowerPoint presentation. Now, they correctly predict that the IT era ends in 2020 and the bio-nano era begins in 2020. This new technology they are injecting in people is bio-nanotechnology, CRISPR. DARPA tech that they've been doing mRNA is 20 plus years old. Got that right. Now, one of the other big things is this telepush, commuting, shopping, entertainment, travel, education, medicine, commerce, politics in particular, and socialization we already know. Now, when we talk about these organizations, I think that this is really where we have to see it. This is what Google, Twitter, all those are. They are Trojan horse civilian systems. If you look at this right here, this is the enemy after next. We're done with the war on terror. We are the new terrorists. We know that infrastructure is now here. Okay, you notice that they're talking about the continental United States population and their infrastructure. Lovely things like information, internet, and psychological warfare are very inexpensive in this. Binary biologics into the food supply, also inexpensive. And then they say Trojan horse civilian systems. Okay, and if you have civilian systems and they're Trojan horses, that means you get to act like these things are private companies and you can't control what they're doing. But really, they're just an arm of this military-industrial complex. Stunning document. There's so much more to go over in it. But the idea, again, that NASA isn't really a front for the military industrial complex when they are created at the same time as DARPA, when we know when we know that the International Space Station actually houses Russians and that we were using Russian rockets up until the last, I think, 18 months ago. We finally put one up with SpaceX. We put our guys up in the ISS. So there's obviously some kind of a treaty behind the scenes. I mean, all this in convergence with the UFO hype and aliens getting more play than ever. You can't turn on the History Channel without being told they're basically our overlords and masters, and that's where we came from. It's a wacky time, bro. Like, it seems like you're right. No matter what quote-unquote side of the political spectrum you're on, it's never been more in your face that there is an agenda outside of traditional politics, in my opinion.
Well, it's really strange, Jason. I mean, I think I tend to go to this place where I feel like a lot of this stuff they're revealing to us is some form of psychological warfare, either for geopolitical purposes or domestic purposes. So let's just take the UFO hype, for example. The big difference between what's happening now with UFOs and culture and before is that 60 Minutes, one of the most esteemed news institutions in the country, ran a very serious special about, how the UFOs are real. So that to me was a big change in the way this is being talked about. CNN starting to talk about it now as if it's serious. The Pentagon releases a report about it saying, we don't think these are aliens, but we don't know what they are, which basically implies that they're still not human made somehow. So all these weird, this is a big shift. This is sort of like taking UFOs from the domain of being sort of fringe, kooky conspiracies on, ancient aliens on the History Channel to being something that's being shown to your grandparents on 60 Minutes as a serious subject. Now, however you fall on the UFO issue, whether you think aliens are visiting us, whether you think these are real alien craft, whether you think, these pilots really saw what they're describing, I tend to not think that they're acting. I kind of tend to believe some of these stories they're saying. But what's very interesting is you always have to assume that when something becomes validated via the mainstream media and the government, if it's a leak, you got to question it and be like, why are we all of a sudden being like, yeah, this is real because the mainstream media and the government told us it's real? That should actually make you take a step back and be like, wait a second, there's something else happening here. They've done psychological warfare decades ago about UFOs. In fact, it's kind of chicken or egg, Jason. Which things we know about UFO culture and sci-fi alien culture came from the government, which things came from sci-fi writers, That's how much the government's been pumping this stuff out. So it kind of makes you wonder, what is this about if it's not about the weaponization of space or wanting to have a reason to weaponize space? And I think, on another level, it could just be psychological warfare here domestically to make us kind of afraid. To make us feel like America isn't that powerful. We're not protected by our Air Force, that these mysterious craft can do whatever they want. I feel like the next stage of this rollout is they're going to dip back into another thing we've been hearing in UFO culture for years and years, which is these UFOs apparently tend to gravitate towards military bases and fiddle with our nuclear arsenal. Now, that's one of the most extremely threatening things you could possibly do to the U.S. Army, is to disable their nukes. So fill in the blanks there. What is that saying to us? It's saying to us that America needs to basically develop more powerful weapons. If a flying Tic Tac can move around in the air like a cartoon and has no friction and can outrun every military jet we have, then that basically means we need to come up with weapons and vehicles that are way faster than what we have now, which would kind of lead to the concept of directed energy weapons or hypersonic nuclear weapons, which is something the U.S. government's already been talking about. We're in this situation where we think that mutually assured destruction is what keeps us from getting involved in nuclear war. But what if the U.S. comes out and says, we got nukes now that will move 10 times faster than every other country's nukes. We will win every nuclear war that you try to, calculate with us. So I don't know. It's very strange, Jason. I personally think it's a psychological warfare happening internally and to our adversaries.
Well, I think right now what we're really looking at again, is the revelation of this technology, again, is to be perceived as not what it is. Okay? And we've had, and I think Russia has had, different types of energy and propulsion systems for some time that we have agreed upon. I think that China is now in the game. That's why that you're brought in. Whenever you can start to make that run up there and some things have to be revealed, certain things happen behind the scenes. So this is another part of that document. And if you look, it says, order of about 10 plus years are required to develop or field new systems. So in other words, new tech. We keep it in inventory for 30 plus years. Okay.
That's so fascinating.
Yeah. And should be designed for middle of inventory period, hence 2025 time period. So a lot of these, and you notice, look at this. It talks about Russian, Iran, Iraq, Pakistan. They talk about politics can change overnight, but this isn't. You know, they have these inventories, and if you look here, you'll even see that sometimes new decisions, devices, whatever, it's about a 15 plus year procedure, but we can keep them 40 years in inventory. Okay.
Wait, I wanted to mention something really quickly, Jason, that's really weird to me is, remember that, all those stories for the past couple of years about the Cuban, American diplomats in Cuba and in various countries getting mysterious brain damage from a weapon. Now they're outright just saying, the headlines are saying, these are microwave weapons.
Yep.
That's like, it's so paranoia inducing. It's just like UFOs and microwave weapons are now being mainstreamed. It totally falls into what you're talking about.
Yeah, and exactly. They talk about those systems, so you could also talk about blast wave accelerators that are literally right here in front of you. Again, internet psychological warfare, information warfare, and there's blast wave accelerators. Well, Havana syndrome has now been acknowledged by the White House and at least twice in the Washington, D.C. vicinity. We have an incident in 2019 in Arlington, and then we have another in 2020 at the Ellipse.
Wow.
So that's I did a story on that. I think that story ran about 3 months ago, and that was on top because they talked about basically what had been happening, like you said, to diplomats and others that were reporting they were in this room and they felt sick and then there was damage. And now they are acknowledging that's happened within the United States. So, yeah, we're not in Kansas anymore. These are things they've discussed and put on paper. They're very open with the fact that they are deceptive. They're keeping these in inventory. If you read that signature reduction article, there is no accountability. There's never been a hearing. Signature reduction is, you know what they're referring it to? They're not even referring it to as a project. They're referring it to, are you ready for this, Robbie? This is just a punch in the dick. As an art form.
Wait, explain what that means. What does signature reduction mean?
So the signature reduction program is the program that I described to you. So when this person presses on it to try to get documents on it, I'm going to type in art. Let's see if we can get that.
So they're talking about the idea of being in deep cover and just meddling around online, pretending to be a civilian.
Yeah, like they literally are like it's an art form. Let's see.
I mean, it's weird because like the deep fake stuff. I mean, that's a good way to just blast or just generate in mass fake visual identity, like of a fake person.
Thank you. Well, that's one of the things. All right, so Robbie, that's something I've discussed on the program now more than ever because a lot of these. First of all, we have real-time deepfakes. We already know the audio thing has been perfected. As far as back in the Obama administration, they were showing crude videos in real time that were publicly available and not militarized, done by Adobe of Putin, Obama, and Bush. Their facial expressions in real time. In fact, you've seen that, right? You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah. I mean, remember, Jason, they even said, I think this was even like in the Truther movement, but it's true, is there was a trade show back in the 90s that played an example of Colin Powell's voice saying, I have been kidnapped by so-and-so, my captors want this amount of money. They played like a fake audio clip of Colin Powell saying they had been taken hostage and that, they were requiring this amount of money. That was in the 90s. And I'm an audio engineer. I was a doubter that this technology existed at all, and then now they're rolling it out now, but it's like, I think the visual technology, from what I understand, is way ahead of the audio. Like there is, maybe they have it already, but I don't even think they have a way yet to do real-time audio voice marking. But maybe they do.
Absolutely. They had already done that here. So they have this is even Trump. This is 2016. So these are the real-time faces. I'm going to take the sound off just because we got to be there. But you can see as he and this is crude, but here's the deal. Not only is this 5 years old, but when these people log on to a virtual Senate meeting or a virtual congressional meeting, which they have over this pandemic, their web is fucking crap, right? Their web is crap. So you put the artifacting over there, you put a little grain. I mean, number one, this is in pretty good definition. But if you needed just a little bit of masking, it wouldn't be hard. And I want to show you this. So this is now just a couple of guys that have a YouTube channel that have decided, Robbie, that they are going to, and maybe this isn't real time, but this just shows how commercial it is, to be 80s Schwarzenegger and Stallone together. Wait till you see how good this stuff is. I mean, this is where we're at. So I always go to the modern, let's go to media influencers.
Oh yeah, this is great. Yeah, some of these deep fakes are,
I mean, look at it.
Pretty amazing.
Look at their faces. It's pretty damn good. And I mean, they keep a real deal. That's commercially available. So, we've talked about it for a long time. You can only trust your eyes, your ears, your five senses so much, especially when there's a propaganda campaign behind it. And I think that's a good place to shift into the QAnon nonsense. So, now we're past January 6th. Now we're past March when they were going to reinstitute Trump. Now the new run is August for those really holding on. I've watched pretty much everything that's out there. I watched the Vice documentary. Did you see that one?
I did, yeah.
Okay, good, because I want to start there, and then we can get into the HBO series. Both of them kind of focusing on different things. Both of them had their strong points, but were disappointing in some aspects to me. I did, extensive reviews on both. Now, let's go to Vice. Okay. Obviously, first thing that disturbed me is obviously trying to insert other quote-unquote conspiracy theories like 9/11 and Epstein into this QAnon field. I think that they did a better job at looking at the actual origins of where this started before it got hijacked, right? They go into the DeFango angle. They talk about Schoenberger a little bit more extensively, a little bit about DEF CON. They don't go hard on Brower or whoever Microchip, because Brower's Dreamcatcher and Microchip are, but they're mentioned along with Posobiec. And then it kind of has, when it comes around, right, more of a we can work together if we can sit and talk feel, right? It ends at the diner. They tried to make it into like a buddy investigation, right? Like they had those little sequences where they come in and shake hands. So in that respect, at least it was a little bit positive. But everybody, referring to the Capitol incident as an insurrection and domestic terror and always putting in the white nationalist stuff, obviously, doesn't make me happy. What were your thoughts on that Vice documentary?
Well, I'll just say at the front that I think that each documentary had its strengths and weaknesses. So, I liked that the Vice documentary, focused on, seemed like they kind of eventually went to lean on or focus on the PSYOP angle. Mm-hmm. Except I just didn't think they did a very good job of it when they really tried to dive into that area. I thought they did a better job of the stuff you mentioned, which was talking about DeFango. Even though I think DeFango is definitely kind of a con artist in himself. He's inserted himself in ways that I don't think he's really involved. But I mean, they did a better job covering that stuff, I thought. The PSYOP stuff, I mean, the most interesting thing to me in the PSYOP part, of course, was Robert David Steele.
Me too.
He's to me one of the more interesting people because we've known of him as being in the Truther movement for years and years. He did some tour with Cynthia McKinney just a couple years ago where they were going around the country trying to raise money. So he's really sort of inserted into this conspiracy movement for a long time. And, to see him being interviewed and being asked about this stuff, I thought was really fascinating. And he's definitely being cagey. I don't know what to make of him.
Well, he walks out once they start talking about Schoenberger, too.
Yeah, he does, yeah.
Yeah. And so for the audience that doesn't understand who RDS is or only what you've learned from, like, some of these other pseudo programs, he originally, and again, I hate Truther Movement, but originally came out as one of the first people as a quote-unquote ex-CIA agent. I don't know that it's ever been proven or disproven, but I would assume if he wasn't part of the agency, it would have been long disproven by now, unless he served some purpose. He came out and started talking about In-Q-Tel and Google's origins basically being as kind of a pseudo NSA type investment, which actually pans out. A lot of these guys, for instance, you remember Morgan Reynolds of the Bush administration questioning 9/11, legit things, and then all of a sudden, no planes. Yeah. Well, eventually, 3-4 years later, Robert David Steele kind of takes on his own flavor of, I will just say, uncontrollable nuttiness, like into things that even if they were true, he has absolutely zero evidence for other than inside sources. And whenever you start hearing about inside sources and secret decoder rings and cabals on the inside going to take this person down or battles in underground bases, you know what Jason Bermas does? He calls bullshit. He calls steaming, heaping piles of bullshit. So I had kind of forgot about RDS other than the fact that, obviously launched pretty big a la Pizzagate again, right? And he got on Jones and he talked about the child sex slave colonies on Mars. And that's that I think that's a good summation, right? But then it was able to really grift away with people like David Wilcock and others in these backdoor conversations, in emails that have been exposed, and with Schoenberger, right? All these guys grifting for money, period. Like, that's what it seemed like. There's always a money angle on grifting with this thing, and that fucking makes me upset so much. So, I mean, once he was kind of put on the spot on that, he walks out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I don't know, it's hard to say if this is also part of some kind of psyop, like the way that they behave, like in the next QAnon documentary by Colin Hobeck, he tracks down Paul Valley. And Paul Valley kind of tells him that there's this network called the Army of Northern Virginia that's a secret group of patriots that's actually replacing the CIA for Trump. Is he just completely blowing smoke, or is there truth to what he's saying? But it's strange, Jason. There's so many odd connections here to just the conspiracy movement going back decades. Like, for example, I was watching something, I think it was Operation Terror. It's some kind of silly sort of dramatization of the 9/11 conspiracy. And they talk quite a bit of Anthony Schaefer in that movie, as if he was this kind of hero. What's so strange is that he turned into a full QAnoner, and he became sort of part of this network of like Robert David Steele-esque military intelligence people.
Did he endorse QAnon for real?
Yeah, he did.
Wow.
And Bill Binney did as well, which is strange that he even got caught up in that. And I don't know what to make of any of these people now. Like, are they legitimate whistleblowers? Are they here to plant disinformation in the conspiracy movement? What's their deal?
Well, all right, let's say this, because I think that this is also important. Let's take a guy like Ray McGovern, who never bit on the QAnon stuff, right? Sure. But he did, like, I was doing a lot of action for Assange, so I got to be with Ray McGovern. He did espouse this idea that somehow Bill Barr was going to do something about this whole thing in the Justice Department and perhaps go after Peter Strzok and Schiff and all these people that obviously conspired behind the scenes to kind of manufacture this thing. So he gave a lot of hopium, which I think a lot of these types that didn't go full QAnon did, for Bill Barr and others. And it's like, look, I love you, Ray, but you were also in the CIA for 26 years. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's like, I love you, Bill, but you were also NSA for very long. You've given a lot of great information. I mean, we're all human, we're all fallible, but I think that those are legitimate questions to ask, right?
100%. I mean, just one example, Jason, that's kind of, let's take it out of the realm of modern politics so it's not as personal feeling for people. Daniel Ellsberg, who's considered this hero whistleblower who got the Pentagon Papers out. He, in fact, was the head of not the head of, but he was like a high up position in the CIA during Vietnam, working on the Phoenix assassination program, doing the same type of things now that the CIA does to make friends with al-Nusra and all these, other sort of rebel groups to try to overthrow Assad. So the only reason I bring that up is because Daniel Ellsberg has never mentioned this in his own biography. No activists talk about this, but it's sort of like, he did have this really shady, crazy intelligence background. So why can't we also talk about that? Not saying that we're mentioning it, saying that he's some kind of double agent, sheep-dipped agent, but at the same time, if the government wanted to sort of soften us and make us, fight less, what they would do is pump out whistleblowers who seem really legitimate and have them kind of be in our movement for a long time. Morgan Reynolds was someone who came out and was like, within a year, he was on about no hologram planes. So
yeah.
More effective method would be someone kind of saying things that sound more sane for a long time.
Well, think about this. Tom Flacco, he had a great 9/11 truth site, and then as soon as Scooter Libby got arrested, he started going the route of the secret indictments, and this was really going to bring Cheney and all them down for 9/11. And that's so much, to me, was a precursor to the same kind of narrative of secret indictments, right, in these QAnon things, these drops. And it just seems like they may have taken whoever, started this thing initially, taken some of these things that they had seen work in the past and get behind in the past, and as the hopium built, really push that type of a narrative. And you're so right, man, that we have to question these things. We're not saying sheep-dipped agents, but let's talk about something really quick that you and I were just like totally blown away about. Public perception, public persona, versus what was possibly going behind the scenes. When you had that leaked Seymour Hersh audio, and he was talking about his source within the FBI, somebody really high up, I'm sure you're the first person that maybe the last person that came to mind would be Andrew McCabe. And yet, when this went to get court, he was named as Hersh's source for this FBI report that had been filed on Seth Rich, allegedly. And later on, it gets further legitimized by the fact that Peter Strzok filed for those FBI reports, and they did indeed seem to exist, even though they denied existence. I mean, that was pretty wild. I mean, that McCabe situation alone should make you step back and go, whoa, what the fuck is going on here? Because there probably couldn't be a more vocal, sure, Robert Mueller was the face of this, special investigation into Trump. But when they really wanted to get into somebody that could speak and really go after Trump, it was McCabe, correct?
Yeah, and I think the game really changed, Jason, when the last president to get in office partly got in by dog whistling to 9/11 truthers. I mean, let's just face it. Roger Stone was going around telling people that Trump was a secret truther for months and months before the election. And I think the game changes after that. It's like, if that's the way that presidential campaigns are run, who knows if that was an op? Who knows if there was a faction of intelligence that told Roger Stone to do that? Who the hell knows? This is the new way to do things, I think. And I think we just need to be really careful about, especially, people who are not proven, people who haven't been around very long. If there's a new person who pops up who's espousing conspiracies and all of a sudden they get really popular, maybe take a step back and be like, why is this person getting so popular so fast? Are they just playing into these conspiracies because they know that's what will entice people? You kind of I just think that that's a smart way to be now. Maybe before you could trust it a little bit more, but not anymore. It's the whole game is upside down now.
Well, let's talk about that really quickly, because it wasn't just 9/11 Truth and Roger Stone. He had said in front of Hannity the connection between Bill Clinton and Epstein that everybody knew about, and on multiple occasions, gotta love the WikiLeaks, can't get enough of the WikiLeaks. So he had hinted that he was going, and that he was going to get us out of the war. He talked about who would really knock down the towers, right? We're going to find out. Those were all things on the run-up that he had said that weren't even historical reference. And when you get to Roger Stone, I'm not sure if you've seen this yet, but Roger Stone recently called out Steve Bannon, basically for testifying against him. And one of the things that people really forget or don't know about at all you people that think, conservative and Stone's great and all these other, things, or Bannon's great in the war room. Look, I like that Bannon had Naomi Wolf on about the lockdowns. I get it. They all serve kind of purposes, but you have to put them on the spot of a place called reality. So before Epstein gets picked up, prior to the midterms, a story gets out in the New York Post that Bannon is meeting with Epstein. Now, you have to ask yourself why, but you have to also think that perhaps it's support, money, finagling for this upcoming midterm election, right? That's on its face where it would be. Otherwise, is he warning him he's being investigated? Are they trading favors? Open to speculation, right? So this story comes out, and I'm working for We Are Change at the time, and just by happenstance, a few days later, Luke runs into Mike Cernovich. And so he goes, is there anything I should ask Cernovich? Yeah. Ask him about that story about Bannon meeting Epstein. So Luke does. And, Cernovich kind of, didn't really expect to be asked that one on camera. But he goes, well, here's the deal. He is like, I like Roger. And apparently that story was sourced by, that Stone gave that story over. That's what he says. But he says that Stone gave that story over the Post. And then he goes, but, that is a good question. And, if I talk to Steve soon, that's definitely a question I would ask. 48 hours later, Cernovich had Bannon on for an hour. didn't ask him a word about it, okay? So, I think people have to be very well aware that these are the players you're dealing with. These are people that have been rooted in a very, very corrupt system and wrangled around that corrupt system, not a decade, not 2 decades, but like a generation, right? Like a generation at this point. Like Stone has been embedded, since his late 20s? And Bannon, now in his, I believe, 50s or maybe early 60s, has been around 25 plus years. A lot, guys, just so you understand, Michael Moore's major distributor on most of his films, a guy named Steve Bannon.
I mean, no, it's so crazy, Jason. I mean, I think back in the day we used to use the term controlled opposition to just describe a few really popular figures who might have been doing damage, but it seems like that concept has just dramatically increased. It's on the rise, and I'm not going to call it anyone specifically, but yeah, it is sort of weird how even when you go back to Steve Bannon, where does he come from? Well, he came from Goldman Sachs. And where did Breitbart start? Well, they took a little trip to Israel symbolically to launch Breitbart in Israel with Andrew Breitbart and Steve Bannon. Why'd they do that? Why were they so into the sort of the Israeli, government time? They describe it as like they really found a fondness with the sort of right-wing Likudnik Israeli government. So all these things are, you just have to look at them all and not, the idea that someone's a renegade and is anti-establishment and they're against the deep state, it's trendy to say that now. It gets you points. It gets you cred. So because it does, a lot of people are going to be saying it. So I guess that's just where I stand on that. Mm-hmm. And you got to prove it, like if you really say that, are you really against the deep state? Prove it.
Uh-huh. So let's talk about the second documentary series, which is a little bit longer. The Vice series, 3 hour long with commercials, so about 40 minutes. It runs a little over 2 hours, I think, right? There was only 3 over on Vice, and you had 6 over on HBO, all of them kind of running between, 50 minutes and an hour plus for some of them. Now, my main criticism of this, number one, is that it really doesn't look at the origin story too hard. Instead of, it's more of an origin story of 8chan, 8kun, and these networks that kind of take it over, and the Williams father and son, right? It's Fred Williams, is that his name? Or am I?
Fred Brennan.
Fred Brennan?
No. Ron Watkins.
The Watkins boy. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, Fred is basically this disabled shit poster that, kind of falls into fame by having his message board become huge, right? And then the spot of QAnon. And then the Watkinses come in. And it becomes more not only about, I guess, the PSYOP and who's running it at that point and the movement behind it, but what are the limits of free speech? Would you say that's kind of correct?
Yeah, and I think he does an okay job, although he definitely takes some positions I don't agree with, but at least he tackles the idea of like free speech and doesn't, go against it. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was a good aspect of it.
But it certainly did kind of like say is free. It tried to frown upon free speech absolutism, right? And
I guess because they use Nazis as an excuse, which I think is a kind of a ploy that the mainstream media has done against 8chan. Or in those websites, that's not why QAnon exists, not because of anti-Semitism or neo-Nazism, So I think that's the ploy that they do.
Yeah, but one of the main things that struck me was that you had a lot of threads of this information out months before this documentary came out. You were one of the first people really putting those threads out about the connections between Flynn, which he gets a lot of spot in this documentary, and the Watkins boys, and basically where QAnon probably went after those initial, what was it? It was on 4chan initially, right? And then moved to 8chan posts. And that's a short transition time, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was only. I mean, this is the weird thing that I learned while talking to Fred, and I still am a little suspicious of Fred. I think he probably, could just be just as involved in posting his queue as the other guys. But yeah, it was only offline for maybe like 2 or 3 weeks. But it's sort of weird because there wasn't like a specific PGP key or trip code that when 4chan went on, or sorry, that when Q went on 8chan, they were like, hey, I can prove that it's me from 4chan. It's like anybody in between that time could have just taken the Q identity and posted it even somewhere else, like a completely different, forum or website. So the fact that it went from 4chan to 8chan so seamlessly and kind of worked sort of suggests some coordination between someone on 4chan and someone on 8chan. The only difference really between 8chan and 4chan, technically speaking, is 8chan allows you to create your own boards, like your own sub forums, basically, kind of like Reddit, I think, lets you do that. So it's like combining Reddit and 4chan together. But yeah, Fred Brennan started the site. And yeah, I mean, it does appear that the Watkinses probably were involved. I mean, because ultimately, even if they weren't posting as Q, they could decide which Q posts came through and which ones didn't. They're the ultimate arbitrators of what's puts out on 8chan or 8kun as it's called now.
Now, yes, absolutely. Yeah. So in that respect, really interesting. Obviously, well done. Obviously, a piece I think he took like 3 years to do, somewhere in there. Leads you down a couple false narratives, Bannon's a player, etc. Maybe one of the big things that rubbed me the wrong way was the Schoenberger stuff, because they kind of, I mean, first of all, they didn't explore, really how fucked up this guy could be. I've seen some things behind the scene. He's trolled my page many times. People have tried to get me on with him, and he's a dangerous dude in my opinion. I think he's a very, and that's not to say that he's, a intelligence agent or paid by that, but just from the public emails of seeing the grifts that he was involved in that they kind of allude to in the Vice documentary, I thought they kind of handled him with kid gloves and then built this mythos around him with the cicada puzzles, where there's a lot of people that challenge whether he jacked those puzzles or was really the guy behind the original thing in the first place. And especially when you're getting to what the QAnon sense kind of originates from, these puzzles, etc. Is it just inspired by? Is it coordinated by? Is this, just a LARP that got out of control and then was used in a PSYOP? Was it a PSYOP from the beginning? These are questions in large part that I don't think have been answered or explored enough. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, the documentary definitely falls short in that regard as well, even though it lets those possibilities remain open and gives you breadcrumbs to follow, in and of itself. There's so much more to explore in that direction because, to what degree was it a PSYOP? Because obviously, if you're involving Michael Flynn at a certain point, you can no longer just say it's a LARP. You can't just say it's people, doing some kind of prank. It went beyond that at that point. So, there's so many more angles to. I mean, even Steve Pachenik, that wasn't explored at all in the documentary. And we know that he was one of the earliest people to describe this narrative. He wasn't talking about a person named Q or anything like that. He's the one who first put out the narrative that Trump was recruited by a sort of a secret group of patriots that wanted to fight the deep state within the U.S. government. His narrative went much deeper than that, but he's an ex-State Department guy. He was involved in hostage negotiations when he was working for the State Department intelligence activity. He's Tom Clancy's sort of Svengali ideas man. He's credited on like about 6 to 7 Tom Clancy books. So Jason, there's tons of rabbit holes to go down. But I definitely think Ron Watkins, after I've seen the documentary changed my thinking just a little bit into thinking that Ron Watkins is somebody who probably had a hand in this because he did become sort of a promoted stop the steal guy. after during that period. And the fact that Hugh stopped posting and then Ron Watkins becomes a sort of stop the steal celebrity, suddenly I thought, it's kind of an interesting coincidence in and of itself. But then, what's just to bring it back around to the UFO thing, now Ron Watkins is all about UFOs, and he actually started a website called UFO Leaks that's supposed to be like WikiLeaks for alien stuff. So, you have to wonder if QAnon's obviously some kind of psyop, then what's Ron Watkins doing getting involved in the UFO stuff?
Well, you know how I feel about the UFO stuff. Some of the other things I don't think that were, covered at length is, not length, and maybe not even in passing much, was the Lin Wood stuff, right?
Oh, yeah.
And, that there's something that's just totally insane, because I remember all the way back when you had this incident at the Olympics where you'd railroaded this guy that didn't bomb it. And obviously Lin Wood makes his bones as the lawyer in this case. And, at the same time all this begins, that story is being told in a Hollywood movie, right? So there couldn't be any more time to have a spotlight on what this guy is known for. He comes in, and obviously one of the things that made the rounds big time was his quote-unquote whistleblower that had the face blurred out. Now, I don't know if you've watched that or listened to that.
I haven't, no.
Well, there's a lot of talk that it's Clapper. And
okay.
Now, if you think about that, he was telling everybody he had this high-level guy that was saying some shit, right? Okay. Now, I've only watched bits and pieces of it, but in this thing, it's alleged that they had this group where, they had compromised people like Roberts, Judge Roberts, they said, and Pence with underage boys. Like, that's part of this whole thing. It's about 30.
Yeah. I saw some stuff like that.
And again, because you know me, I don't take this random stuff. But boy, if you wanted to run a psyop and you had a guy like Clapper who's already a known liar, remember, this is the same dude that swore that they weren't collecting any information on Americans at all, and he got away with it. And you wanted to implant somebody that gives the legitimate air of we were really trying from the inside to help Trump, the anti-Brennan, to just give somebody like Lin Wood hope that he had all this information and then go public with it and all of it being happy horseshit. Clapper could be the guy.
Well, I mean, I actually didn't see any of that stuff, so yeah. I can't comment directly on the whistleblower that he brought out, but just Lin Wood specifically, I don't know what to make of it. I mean, I forgot who it was that came on my podcast and suggested maybe they're out there just generating so much noise as some kind of distraction away from the actual, however you fall on the idea that Trump was defrauded or not in the election. It seems like that could have just been a whole psyop that they were running in and of itself just to take away from Trump's losses in his, and he didn't make any gains in terms of proving his case. Let's just put it that way. So as that was unfolding, you have Lin Wood and Sidney Powell out there just making so much noise and acting so crazy, and I'm not saying Rudy Giuliani's hair dye dripped down his face on purpose. I don't think that was part of a psyop, but it's sort of, it is just sort of weird how Lin Wood used to be this credible celebrity lawyer. I mean, he represented, as you said, Richard Jewell. He represented John Benet Ramsey's parents, I think, during that whole thing. And then all of a sudden, he's out there sounding like an evangelical QAnoner. I mean, just saying the craziest things on stage. I don't know what to make of that. I mean, was he acting? Did he get convinced to believe something? It's so wild, Jason. I really don't know. I mean, even Bill Binney, leading up to the election, he was saying that a directed energy weapon had hit his house, and he was tagging Flynn on Twitter trying to get help for it. Was he having a psychotic break, or was he trying
now that we know with Havana syndrome, right, and all these weapons,
a microwave weapon shot at him?
I mean, and that's the thing. We talked about it a little bit when COVID 1984 hit, and we more and more live in a society like children of men, where when something happens, there's the immediate question, well, was it this group? Was it the government? And there's so much confusion that it's hard to have the discernment of where it's coming. Is it a hoax? Is it a grifter? And I think, Robbie, and maybe this is where we'll wrap it up, we are truly living in the post-truth world that was discussed at Bilderberg in 2017. You know, we don't even know if a Bilderberg meeting's going on right now this summer. It may very well be. I've been to their website. Kriston Harris has got in touch with their press, and he did get an email back, and they didn't say it was canceled or postponed. You know, all we know is that 2020 supposedly didn't happen. And again, when you have this consortium of the predator class and their talking heads, their capos, the Faucis of the world, the Cuomos of the world, meeting in these closed-door meetings, right? 4 years implementing a plan. I mean, these are long-term guys, long-shift guys. So what are your thoughts in that? How much truth, especially with narrative control, with draconian regulations on populaces that aren't backed by science, with Alex Jones trending yesterday to arrest him for what happened at the Capitol? I mean, how far gone are we?
It's so interesting, because I do think that there's definitely something artificial. I mean, obviously, about the level of outrage towards Trump in the last 4 years. I mean, it went so over the top. There's something artificial about it, but I do think it sort of acts as a distraction, in the sense that, even it would affect me at times, where like I would be thinking so much about the crazy things Trump was doing or saying. Sometimes I would realize, oh, I'm not looking enough at, what's going on in Afghanistan right now. Just because Afghanistan's not on the news doesn't mean that Trump isn't bombing it still. So like, in a way, I feel like there's a lot of stuff happening now that's distracting us away from things that we would have normally, looked at in the past. Like, we really don't know how much Trump was bombing and doing things, in terms of his foreign policy, because I feel like we were just so distracted. And also, they also put like less, what was it? They lessened or the restrictions for like what you're have to report in terms of like civilian casualties and stuff like that. I just feel like we're very distracted by things, not just in what the news is trying to show us, but just like in pop culture in general. I mean, even now that we're having like a new technology sort of boom with all this creepy stuff, that's sort of,
dude, that's another episode, right?
Our radar. It's a lot to process. I think psychologically, it's just a lot to take on. And then this situation, no matter how you fall on the COVID-19 thing, I think it was traumatic for pretty much everybody on some level. So we were really in a bad place mentally, I think. And, it's just, I think going back to our initial mindset, like, where you and I were like 15 years ago is still how we should be now. We should cut through the partisan stuff, realize that, nobody from the mainstream media is going to save us. That's a myth that people have sort of, I don't know. I'm just totally going off.
No, you're right. It is. No one else is going to save us. I keep fucking telling people that. And by the way, if you really want to see some of these white papers, this is one of the newer ones out here. This is brain-computer interfaces by the good people at the Rand Corporation. They really don't hide it, folks. I mean, this is them laying this out for Security 2040. I'd encourage you to at least peruse this bad boy. It's 40-plus pages. There's so much of this stuff out there. I'd also encourage you to check out Robbie Martin's stuff. MediaRoots.org, the podcast, like you said, on all major platforms. And you've really, over the last year and a half, gone extremely hard on the history of this country and its association with Masonry. So why don't you tell some people about that and where they can find that information as well?
Yeah, so I it was originally intended to be like a 2-part podcast, like 4 hours total, going over the history of the Freemasonic history of the United States. And it's ended up being a much bigger project than I anticipated originally. Some people have compared it to Dan Carlin, Hardcore History, doing an episode about Freemasons, and it's going to be 8 parts long when the next part comes out. It's already about 35 hours long in total. It's a massive history lesson on the Freemasonic history of the United States. And I don't play in any particular angle. I mean, I think the Masons are silly, and I think they're kind of ridiculous, and that's sort of how I went into it. But I don't like the Masons now, but man, there's just so much to learn about, how it influenced not just this country, but like culture, just the whole American mindset, the way we think about things. So yeah, it's if if you're interested in that kind of stuff, secret societies, check it out, because they also go over, Bohemian Grove. Our next episode is actually going to cover the very first cremation of care that ever happened in the 1890s.
Really?
What's that? What is that?
So right here is The Long Ago and the Later On by a man named George T. Bromley, that actually is the one that brought the owl over, and basically he traveled a lot, but I mean, if you look at him, he's old Uncle George, and this is actually, inside is his Bohemian Grove Best Loved Man clipping from a newspaper over 100 years ago. This is
wow. Okay, we need to talk about that more off air, because I was actually trying to figure out when the owl got installed there.
I'm sure this book actually tells you. This is Bromley right here, and I got this year. And I was really lucky to get, there's a blue cover version. And for some reason, the older version, I was able to get cheaper. And it's wild, dude. And it's one of those things where I have a bunch of the annals. I think I have 8 of the 10 published annals.
Oh, dude, I need to talk I didn't realize you had all these.
Oh, I do. I've got all the annals, dude.
Oh,
in fact, Militich has one of my annals. I loaned it to him, but I'm going to try to get that back this week so I can do a full thing on it. But Bromley, he's the dude, man. He's basically the guy they pushed back on. He became a staple in there. And it tells actually how he gets tapped right in the very beginning for the Bohemian Grove. Right here, it was from some business associate. He'd gone into a building and they asked him. So you could actually maybe even find a PDF of scans of this. The Long Ago and the Later On by George T. Bromley. That's just one of the, we're goofy guys. We go into all this history. I like to stick to what I can prove, but I like to be able to have the discernment of as much knowledge that's publicly available. And that's why I respect what Robbie does, because to go down those very deep rabbit holes, especially historical ones, are not easy. There's a lot of old source material that you have to digest and then summarize for your audience. And you're a master at that, my friend. So let's not wait 6 months. Let's get back together and maybe even do a Bohemian Grove collaboration where that's where we focus on.
That would be fantastic. Yeah, because there is so much material out there, Jason, in terms of Bohemian Grove. I mean, you go on eBay. I mean, there's like hundreds of old plays, and I mean, you got to really know what to look for too. So
I've got a ton of it. By the way, I've got in fact, there's 2 books by journalists out there, and I have a hardcover of one of them.
I think I have one of those.
Yeah. That's pretty impressive as well. So
John Brown D was one of them.
Yeah, that's the one I have, I believe. Yeah, I think that's the one I got. So yeah, man, I'd love to do that episode. Robbie, thank you, brother, and we'll be in touch. All right.
Take care, man.
Later on, everybody. That was Robbie Martin. I always love having him on. A host of information. Please thumbs the video up, subscribe, and share. Remember, we might not have a YouTube channel tomorrow. We were supposed to be off for another week and a half. I honestly thought I was going to be hitting the road without doing it. So make the Rockfin account. Over 18,000 followers. Can't be wrong. If you do have a premium subscription, right, instead of just the bits and pieces of Brian Callen, you can go over, because if you get a premium subscription with Jason Burmis, or you get one with Sam Tripoli or anybody over there, if you get one with Robbie Martin and Media Roots, you can get everybody's stuff. And right now, both of my episodes are on there, the Conspiracy Social Club. That's 3+ hours. 3+ hours of material right there where we break it down. I want to thank Odyssey for backing up my YouTube channel. And remember, the link down below, if you want to financially support me outside of being a premium member and all that good jazz, is right there with the GoFundMe. I just want to make sure. We do have a tip. Look at this smokestack. Thank you so much for the tip. We really do appreciate that. Let's see if we got any more. I want to run through them quick because you can only tip on Rockfin. Elijah Kramer. Thanks, Jay. Good to see you back on the tube. Although I always Rockfin first. Just my monthly donation. Appreciate all you do, brother. Well, thank you, Elijah Kramer. I do really appreciate that. And then, what else do we have? I think that's it right there. So, guys, I love you. You know where to find me, and I'll see you on the flip side.